Here we are. It's been raining, everything's clean, you can hear the birds. I mean, what I want to talk about is the issue which has been on everybody's mind over the past few weeks. Issues that were raised with the what's been happening in Parliament House, but more importantly, that's the federal parliament, is the lack of response from the federal politicians regarding the serious accusations that have been made regarding members of parliament and regarding behaviour of staffers. And what it's done, it's highlighted the inequalities that exist in our society, especially the inequalities as far as women are concerned. Now, the usual response to this situation, which we see over and over again, is changing criminal legislation, criminalising behaviour, increasing sentences, not actually tackling the issue. And if we accept that it's a question of inequality, we need to find out how we can decrease violence, especially violence against women. And we look at a number of things. The first one I'd like to look at is the universal basic income, which we've spoken about in this program. Economic dependency means that people are basically prisoners in a situation and are unable to make choices because of that economic dependence. Now, what a universal basic income does is that it gives every individual in society an income which looks after their basic needs, irrespective of whether they're in the paid workforce or not, irrespective of whether they're young or old, irrespective. So universal basic income breaks the economic dependency model, which is so important in questions of family violence and interpersonal violence in relationships, whether it's same-sex or heterosexual, the question of violence within relationships. Economic independence gives people choices which they don't have when they're economically dependent. So a universal basic income is fundamental to the issue of decreasing family and violence in interpersonal relationships and violence against women. It is fundamental. Without economic independence, people don't have the ability to make choices, to free themselves from difficult situations. So that's the first suggestion. The second suggestion, irrespective of whether you say it's inequalities in power that are the drivers of violence, especially violence against women, we need to look at the mental health status, because in many situations where violence is a fundamental part of a relationship, mental health status is exceptionally important. And we've seen in Australia that the mental health facilities that are available in the public sector are woefully inadequate, catastrophically short of what we should have. What happens is that if people have mental health issues and they don't have the resources to access treatment, well, these mental health issues continue to bubble over and be drivers of violence in relationships. And some of the worst examples of family violence we have seen, and violence against women, there has been a major mental health component. So reform of the mental health system so that people can access mental health support is fundamental to decreasing violence against women, interpersonal violence, and violence in the community. The third thing we need to look at is what's happening in our society. We've seen two major developments in the last 20 years which technology has been responsible for. One is the sexualisation of children, where we see advertisements, people trying to make money in advertisements by sexualising children. And then we see the pornographic industry. I'm not talking about pornography as you or I may have known it, but pornography, which in the majority of cases can be easily accessed on the net, where violence is a constant feature. Violence is the constant feature in these pornographic things. And again, this is about making a buck. It's not about people want to find themselves in that situation. It's about making money by sexualising children, by commodifying women's bodies, by having violent pornography. And the effect this has on children. Because most children today, whether inadvertently or advertently, can access violent pornography on the net at any time they want to. So it becomes a feature in the cultural norms that children are experiencing today about what is a normal relationship. So what happens is the nature of relationships culturally change because of violent pornography. And violent pornography is on the net basically to make money. Like the sexualisation of children is about making money out of people. It's about making profits. So we've got mental health issues, we've got economic dependency, and then we have drug issues. Drugs, both legal and illegal, play a significant part in Australian life, and they play a significant part in interpersonal violence, violence against women, violence within relationships. A significant part. So while we criminalise the taking of drugs, we find that all the associated paraphernalia, the illegality, the introduction of criminal elements, the huge profits that can be made, that we find that more and more people get involved in drug taking. And in some cases, not all cases, with drug taking, violence is a feature of that. So if you decriminalise illegal drugs and make them legal, then you break that nexus. You transfer things from a criminal problem to a health problem. It's the same with alcohol, which is a major driver of violence in our community. So we need to decriminalise drugs. We need to tackle the scourge of alcoholic dependency, but in terms of making it into a medical model. And unless we tackle these four issues, economic independence, suitable mental health facilities for everybody, not just people who can afford it, the decriminalisation of drugs and alcohol abuse and drugs being seen through a medical model, not a criminal model, the tackling of violent pornography, access of violent pornography on the net, which is there obviously to make profit, and tackling the issue of the sexualisation of children through violent pornography, and also through the use of advertising. So in a 21st century society, we do have the capacity to decrease violence. But violence against women and against children and interpersonal violence is not a matter of attitude. Personal attitudes can change. But people are talking about cultural change, not attitudinal change. And in order to have cultural change, you need institutional change. If there is no institutional change, there is no mass cultural change. There may be individual attitudinal change, but not mass cultural change. And in order to create the climate for mass cultural change, we need to tackle these 4 issues if we wish to decrease violence against women. Economic independence. Fundamental. If there is no economic independence, if there is no universal basic income, there is no mechanism via which people can escape from untenable, violent relationships. You can use the criminal justice system, but it doesn't tackle that issue of economic independence. Then we have the issue, as I said before, mental health services, access to mental health services. In Australia, we have seen, as far as the public mental health sector is concerned, a woeful lack of resources and staff. The recent Royal Commission in Victoria described the situation as catastrophic and demanded major institutional change. And then we had the other issue of the sexualisation of children through advertising. We see younger and younger children being sexualised and using advertising to sell products. Then one of the major issues that we tend to overlook is the effect that violent pornography, which is easily available on the easy availability of violent pornography on the net, and the inability to be able to limit access to that violent pornography to younger people. Especially, and we're not talking about younger people, I'm not talking about teenagers, I'm talking about people in their early teens, 10, 11, 12, who may be inadvertently exposed to it. And what that does is changes culture in terms of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable sexual behaviour. And it's interesting that research that's been recently done highlights that it's men in their 60s who have a much more rational approach as far as violence against women is concerned as compared to much younger people, irrespective of education they've received in school. And a lot of that is related to the easy accessibility of violent pornography. So that's something that needs to be tackled. Obviously it can't be banned, but there should be mechanisms by which it can be addressed. Then we talked about economic issues, social issues, mental health issues, and drugs. Alcohol, legal and illegal drugs, that we need to have more medical resources directed in that area, because violence against women is just not a matter about inequality in power. Inequality in power may be at the basis of it, but ultimately, if you want to break that inequality, we need to look at economic independence, mental health services, decriminalisation of drugs, people with problems with drugs be treated in a medical fashion, and we need to tackle the problem of the World Wide Web and the internet and the changes in culture as more and more younger children are exposed to violent pornography on the net, either advertently or inadvertently, which then changes attitudes to what is and isn't acceptable behaviour. It's all very well teaching consent in schools and the concept of consent, but it goes much further than the concept of consent. So these are important issues. They will continue to be there. They'll never be resolved, but they can be diminished. We can have cultural change through institutional change. We can change individual attitudes We've seen it with racism. There has been a change in attitude. It's not universal, but there is a change in attitude, and that has been accompanied by institutional changes, not just in terms of criminal sanctions, but institutional change to tackle the problem of racism. And it's the same as far as violence against women is concerned. Obviously, awareness is important, discussion is important, attitudinal change is important, but institutional change, which looks at the drivers of violence against women, is fundamental if we wish or want as a society to address this scourge in our midst.